At 6:43 on a cold Monday morning in Cleveland, Ohio, Daniel Brooks stood outside a small auto repair shop holding a cardboard box. Everything he owned from his desk at the shop was inside it. A coffee mug, a pair of work gloves, 2 framed photographs, and a small notebook filled with ideas nobody had ever taken seriously. Daniel was 27 years old. He had just been fired. Again. His manager, Frank, had called him into the office 10 minutes earlier. "Daniel, you're a good worker," Frank had said. Daniel knew what came next. "But you're not management material." Daniel had heard those words before. From teachers, from relatives, from former employers, even from people who claimed to love him. Frank continued. "You have too many ideas." Daniel looked at him. "I thought companies wanted people with ideas. Not when they can't follow instructions." Daniel quietly nodded. Then Frank handed him his final paycheck. "Good luck." Daniel walked out. He stood on the sidewalk for several seconds, watching cars pass. Then he looked at the cardboard box in his hands. He wanted to throw it into the trash. Instead, he carried it to his old pickup truck. He put the box on the passenger seat and drove home. Daniel's apartment was a small second-floor unit on the west side of Cleveland. The rent was $150 a month. His savings were $1,382. His car needed new tires. His student loan payments were overdue, and his mother had recently started asking whether he had found a real career. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed. His phone buzzed. It was his younger sister, Megan. "Hey, how was work?" Daniel stared at the screen. He didn't want to tell her, but he answered, "I got fired." Silence. Then Megan said, "What happened?" "They said I'm not management material." She sighed. "Daniel, I know. Maybe you should stop trying to start businesses." Daniel looked at the notebook on his desk. "I wasn't trying to start a business." "You've been talking about starting something since you were 18. Daniel smiled sadly. "Yeah, and nothing has worked." He knew she wasn't trying to hurt him. She was worried. But sometimes the truth from someone you love hurts more than criticism from a stranger. "I'll figure something out," Daniel said. Megan hesitated. "Maybe just get a normal job." Daniel hung up. He wasn't angry at her. She was probably right. At least that's what everyone kept telling him. The kid who was always behind. Daniel had never been the student teachers expected much from. In high school, he struggled with math. He read slowly. He hated public speaking. He wasn't good at sports. And he wasn't the kind of student who raised his hand with the right answer. Teachers often described him using words like unfocused, average, easily distracted, needs improvement. His father had been a mechanic. His mother worked at a hospital billing office. They weren't poor, but money was always carefully managed. When Daniel was 14, his father lost his job after the repair shop where he worked closed. For almost a year, his father struggled to find steady employment. Daniel watched him. He saw what unemployment did to a person: the stress, the embarrassment, the fear of opening a bill, the way his father stopped buying things for himself. That experience changed Daniel. He became obsessed with understanding how businesses worked. He wanted to know why some companies survived while others disappeared. Why did customers choose one business over another? Why did some employees stay for 20 years while others quit after 6 months? Why did some small businesses become successful? At 16, Daniel started repairing bicycles for neighbors. He charged $20 for simple repairs. By the end of summer, he had earned nearly $2,000. His father was impressed. "Maybe you have something there." Daniel believed him. Then he tried to turn it into a business. He printed flyers. He created a name: Brooks Mobile Repairs. He bought a used toolbox. He even created a simple website. But customers didn't come. After 6 months, he gave up. His first business had failed. Then came another idea. Then another. None lasted. By 25, Daniel had started and abandoned 4 different side businesses: a lawn care service, a phone repair business, an online resale store, and a small delivery company. Every failure gave people another reason to doubt him. His uncle once laughed at Thanksgiving. "Daniel, maybe entrepreneurship isn't your thing." Everyone laughed. Daniel laughed too. But he remembered it. The notebook. After losing his job, Daniel opened the notebook on his desk. He had started writing in it years earlier. Ideas filled every page. Some were ridiculous. Some were impossible. Some were actually good. On the final page, he had written, "I want to build something that solves a real problem." Underneath it were 3 words: "Small businesses struggle." Daniel knew that was true. He had seen it at every job. Small businesses were often great at what they did, but they struggled with organization, scheduling, customer follow-up, inventory, marketing, and one problem appeared again and again. They lost customers because they didn't respond quickly enough. Daniel began researching. He spent the next 3 nights studying small businesses. He called owners. He asked questions. He made notes. One question kept coming up. How do you keep track of customers who call when you're too busy to answer? Most owners had no good answer. They used sticky notes, notebooks, spreadsheets, or simply memory. Daniel saw an opportunity. He didn't know how to build software. He didn't have investors. He didn't have a business degree. He didn't even have enough money to pay next month's rent comfortably. But he had an idea. He wanted to create a simple system that would help small businesses automatically organize customer inquiries and follow up with them. Daniel called it Reply Right. The name wasn't important. The idea was, for the first time, he wasn't trying to build something because it sounded exciting. He was trying to solve a problem he had actually observed. Daniel spent his last $600 hiring a freelance developer to build a basic prototype. Then he waited. 2 weeks later, the prototype arrived. It was ugly, slow, and full of problems. Daniel stared at the screen. Then he smiled, because it worked. Barely, but it worked. He called 10 local businesses. 9 rejected him. 1 agreed to test it. A small plumbing company owned by a man named Rick. Rick told him, "I don't know if this thing is going to work." Daniel smiled. "Neither do I." Rick laughed. "At least you're honest." For the next month, Daniel worked with Rick. He listened. He changed the software. He fixed problems. He simplified the system. And then something happened. Rick's business began receiving more repeat customers. Not because Daniel had created some magical technology, because customers were finally receiving timely responses. Rick called him. "Daniel, whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Daniel sat quietly after the call. He looked at his notebook. For the first time, someone wasn't telling him his idea was stupid. Someone was telling him it worked. But Daniel didn't know yet that the hardest part was still ahead. Because having a good idea was one thing, convincing people to believe in it was another. And Daniel was about to discover just how difficult that would be. Daniel needed money. Not millions. Not even hundreds of thousands. He needed enough to build a proper version of Reply Right. He prepared a business plan. He created a presentation. He calculated potential revenue. Then he started contacting investors. His first meeting lasted 11 minutes. The investor looked through Daniel's presentation. Then he closed the folder. "You don't have a business background." "No." "You don't have technical experience." "No." "You've failed at several businesses." "Yes." The investor raised an eyebrow. "Then why should I invest in you?" Daniel thought about it. "Because I've learned from every one of those failures." The investor smiled politely. "That's admirable." Daniel knew what that meant. "No." The second investor said no. The third said no. The fourth didn't respond. The fifth told him, "You're trying to compete in a crowded market." The sixth said, "You don't have enough experience." The seventh said, "Come back when you have traction." Daniel left every meeting with the same expression. Calm, but inside he was exhausted. At night, he worked from his apartment. During the day, he visited businesses. He ate cheap sandwiches. He stopped going out. He sold his television, then his gaming console, then his second monitor. Finally, he sold his father's old motorcycle, which Daniel had inherited. That one hurt. His father had died 2 years earlier. The motorcycle was the last thing Daniel owned that belonged to him. Daniel sat beside it before selling it. "I'm sorry, Dad." He ran his hand over the handlebars. I'll make this mean something. Then he sold it. He used the money to pay the developer. The first big rejection. One afternoon, Daniel received an email. A major regional business group had agreed to review Reply Right. If they became a customer, Daniel would have enough revenue to keep the company alive for another year. He prepared for days. He wore the only suit he owned. He printed documents. He practiced his presentation. The meeting began at 2 p.m. Daniel explained the problem. He demonstrated the software. He showed the results from Rick's plumbing company. The executives listened. At the end, one man asked, "How many customers do you have?" 7. The room became quiet. 7? Yes. That's your entire customer base? Right now. The man leaned back. Daniel, this is not a business yet. Daniel nodded. I understand. We're going to pass. Daniel thanked them. He walked outside. Then he sat in his truck. He didn't start the engine. He just stared through the windshield. 7 customers. Maybe they were right. Maybe everyone had been right. Maybe he wasn't meant to succeed. That night, Daniel opened his father's old toolbox. He didn't know why. Inside were wrenches, screwdrivers, old receipts, and a folded piece of paper. Daniel opened it. It was an old handwritten note from his father. Daniel had never seen it before. It said, "Nobody can tell you what you're capable of. They can only tell you what they believe." Daniel read it 3 times. Then he laughed. His father had written it years earlier. Maybe it wasn't meant for him, but it felt like it was. 7 customers. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He stopped chasing investors. He stopped trying to impress people. He focused on his 7 customers. He called everyone. What do you hate about the software? They told him. He listened. What would make your life easier? They answered. He listened again. Then he rebuilt the product. For 3 months, Daniel didn't try to get hundreds of customers. He tried to make 7 customers extremely happy. 1 became 2 referrals. 2 became 5. 5 became 12. 12 became 30. By the end of the year, Reply Right had 83 paying customers. Daniel was still broke. But now he had proof. He returned to one of the investors who had rejected him. The investor looked at the numbers. How did you do this? Daniel smiled. I listened. The investor offered him money. Daniel declined. The investor looked surprised. Why? Because I don't need the money right now. It was the first time Daniel had ever walked into a room with power. He didn't need someone to believe in him. He had finally learned to believe in himself. The first employee. Daniel hired his first employee. Her name was Olivia. She had been working in customer support for another company. During her interview, she asked, "Where do you see this company in 5 years?" Daniel laughed. Honestly, I don't know. Olivia smiled. That's not a very impressive answer. Daniel nodded. But I know where I want it to go. Where? I want small business owners to stop feeling like technology was built for everyone except them. Olivia looked at him. I like that. She joined the company. Then came 2 more employees. Then 5. Daniel moved out of his apartment and rented a tiny office. The office had bad lighting. The heating barely worked. But Daniel loved it. He put his father's old toolbox on a shelf. It became a reminder. The moment he almost quit. Then everything went wrong. A major software update caused a system failure. Nearly half of Reply Right's customers couldn't access their accounts. Customers were furious. One by one, they canceled. Daniel watched the customer count fall. The company was losing money every day. His employees were scared. Olivia asked, "What are we going to do?" Daniel didn't know. For 3 nights, nobody slept. Daniel personally called customers. He apologized. He refunded payments. He promised to fix the problem. Some customers yelled at him. Others hung up. One customer said, "You've proven you're not ready for this." That sentence broke him. At 3:15 a.m., Daniel sat alone in the office. The lights were off. His father's toolbox was on the shelf. Daniel whispered, "Maybe they're right." Then Olivia walked in. She had been sleeping on the office couch. She heard him. "No, Daniel looked at her. What? Don't say that. Olivia, you told me something when I joined. What? You said problems don't decide whether a company survives. The response does. Daniel stared at her. She continued. So respond. Daniel stood up. They worked until sunrise. They fixed the system. They rebuilt the damaged section. They contacted every customer. They explained what happened. And something unexpected happened. Some customers returned. Then more. Not everyone came back. But enough did. Daniel learned one of the most important lessons of his life. Success wasn't avoiding failure. Success was learning how to survive it. 3 years after Daniel was fired from the auto repair shop, Reply Right had more than 2,000 customers. The company had employees in 3 states. Daniel was still working long hours. But now there was something different. People were calling him investors, business owners, conference organizers, journalists. The same people who had ignored him wanted meetings. Daniel didn't hate them. He understood. People often believe what the numbers prove. And now the numbers were speaking. One morning, Daniel received an email from a national business conference. They wanted him to speak. The topic: Building a business when nobody believes in you. Daniel stared at the invitation. Then he laughed. It was almost too perfect. He accepted. The speech. The conference was held in Chicago. Hundreds of entrepreneurs filled the room. Daniel stood backstage holding a microphone. His hands were shaking. He still hated public speaking. A staff member said, "You're on in 2 minutes." Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered high school. Teachers telling him he needed to work harder. His uncle laughing. The investors rejecting him. His father losing his job. The motorcycle he had sold. The 7 customers. The software failure. The nights he thought about quitting. Then his name was announced. Daniel walked onto the stage. The room applauded. He looked at the audience. Then he said, 5 years ago, almost everyone who knew me thought I would fail. The room became quiet. Some of them were probably right. People laughed. Daniel smiled. I failed a lot. He told them about his first businesses. The bicycle repairs. The lawn care company. The failed online store. The delivery business. He told them about being fired. Then he said, for a long time, I thought success meant proving people wrong. He paused. But I was wrong. The audience listened. Success isn't proving somebody else wrong. Success is becoming the person you were. Capable of becoming before anyone gave you permission. The room was silent. Daniel continued, if someone tells you that you can't do something, don't waste your life arguing with them. Build. Learn. Improve. Let your results speak. The applause began before he finished. Daniel stood there listening. But he wasn't thinking about the applause. He was thinking about his father. The letter. After the speech, Daniel returned to his hotel room. He opened his suitcase. Inside was the old toolbox. He had brought it with him. Inside was the note. Nobody can tell you what you're capable of. They can only tell you what they believe. Daniel took a photograph of it. Then he posted it online. The post went viral. Thousands of people shared it. Messages arrived from people across the country. A young man who had failed college. A woman trying to start a bakery. A father who had lost his job. A teenager who had been bullied at school. They all said the same thing. Your story gave me hope. Daniel realized something. Maybe his greatest success wasn't the company. Maybe it was showing people that failure wasn't a final identity. The offer. 6 months later, a large technology company approached Daniel. They wanted to acquire Reply Right. The offer was enormous. More money than Daniel had ever imagined seeing. His board recommended accepting. His employees were nervous. Daniel spent several weeks considering it. Then he asked himself, why did I build this company? The answer was simple. He wanted to help small businesses. So Daniel negotiated a different deal. He agreed to a partial acquisition while retaining control of the company. He used part of the money to create a foundation. Its mission was simple: help people from ordinary backgrounds start small businesses. The foundation provided small grants. Not huge amounts. Sometimes $2,000. Sometimes $5,000. Enough to buy equipment, create a website, purchase inventory, pay for licenses, get through the first difficult months. Daniel knew exactly what $2,000 could mean, because he had once counted every dollar. The boy who reminded him of himself. 1 year later, Daniel visited a community entrepreneurship program. A 17-year-old boy named Marcus stayed behind after the workshop. He looked nervous. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "My teacher says I'm not really a business person." Daniel smiled. "Why?" "I get bad grades." Daniel nodded. "I got bad grades too." Marcus looked surprised. "You?" "Absolutely." "Then how did you become successful?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I didn't become successful because I was the smartest person in the room." "Then why?" "Because I kept learning after everyone else decided I couldn't." Marcus looked down. "What if I fail?" Daniel smiled. "You probably will." Marcus looked shocked. Daniel laughed. "I'm serious." "You'll fail?" "That's not very encouraging." "It is if you understand what failure means." Daniel pointed toward the boy's notebook. "Failure isn't a verdict. It's information." Marcus looked at the notebook. Daniel continued. "Every time something doesn't work, you learn something about what does." Marcus smiled. "Did that really work for you?" Daniel nodded. "But it took longer than I wanted." Marcus closed his notebook. "I think I'm going to try." Daniel smiled. "Good." He walked away. And for a moment, Daniel saw himself at 17. A kid everyone had already decided would be average. A kid who had no idea what he was capable of. 10 years after, Daniel had stood outside that auto repair shop holding a cardboard box. He returned to the same neighborhood. The shop was still there. The building looked almost exactly the same. Daniel parked across the street. For a moment, he simply sat in his car. He remembered Frank, the manager who had told him, "You're not management material." Daniel smiled. Not because he was angry, because he no longer needed revenge. He walked into the shop. Frank was still there. Older now. Frank recognized him immediately. "Daniel?" Daniel smiled. "Hey, Frank." Frank looked at him. "I heard about your company." "Yeah. You're doing pretty well." Daniel nodded. "I've been fortunate." Frank laughed. "I always knew you had something." Daniel smiled. They both knew that wasn't true. But Daniel didn't correct him, because he wasn't there to prove Frank wrong. He was there to thank the past for teaching him what the present could become. The new building. A few months later, Daniel announced something unexpected. He was opening a training center for young entrepreneurs. The building was located in the same city where he had grown up. The center offered free classes: business basics, accounting, marketing, customer service, technology, leadership. The first classroom was named after his father, James Brooks' Innovation Room. On the wall was a framed copy of the handwritten note. "Nobody can tell you what you're capable of. They can only tell you what they believe." Daniel wanted every person who walked into that room to see it, because he knew what it felt like to hear. "You can't. You aren't smart enough. You don't have enough experience. You're not a leader. You're not ready. You'll probably fail." Sometimes those words come from strangers. Sometimes they come from people who love you. Sometimes they come from your own mind. But Daniel had learned that none of those voices had the final authority over his future. The call from his sister. One evening, Daniel's phone rang. It was Megan. Hey, remember when I told you to get a normal job?" Daniel laughed. "I remember. I was wrong." Daniel smiled. "You were trying to help." "I know, but I was wrong." Daniel looked through the window of his office. Below him, employees were leaving for the evening. The building was quiet. "You know what?" Daniel said. "What?" "I was wrong too." Megan laughed. "About what?" "I thought I had to prove everyone wrong." There was a pause. "I don't anymore." The real success. Daniel had achieved things he once thought were impossible. He owned a successful company. He had financial security. He employed hundreds of people indirectly through his programs. He had spoken on stages across the country. He had helped new entrepreneurs start businesses. But none of those things mattered as much as the moment he saw someone else succeed. One afternoon, a woman named Sarah visited his office. She had received a small grant from his foundation. She had started a mobile catering business. When she walked into Daniel's office, she was crying. "I got my first big contract." Daniel stood up. "Congratulations. It will let me hire 2 people." Daniel smiled. "That's incredible." Sarah wiped her eyes. "I almost quit." Daniel nodded. "I know that feeling." She laughed. "You always say that." "Because it's true." Sarah looked around the office. "Did you ever think you'd get here?" Daniel thought about it. "No." She looked surprised. "Really?" "No." "What made you keep going?" Daniel looked at the old toolbox sitting on his shelf. "My father." Sarah nodded. Daniel continued. "And honestly, I got tired of letting other people's opinions become my future." The last lesson. Daniel eventually wrote a letter to his younger self. He kept it inside the same notebook where he had once written his first business idea. It said, "Dear Daniel, I know you're tired. I know you're scared. I know you're looking around and wondering why everyone else seems to know what they're doing. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You don't even need to believe in yourself every single day. You just need to keep moving. Learn something. Try again. Ask for help. Start small. And when you fail, don't call yourself a failure. Call it information. One day, you'll understand that the people who doubted you weren't necessarily your enemies. Some were afraid for you. Some didn't understand you. Some were projecting their own limitations onto you. And some simply couldn't imagine a future they had never seen. Don't hate them. Just don't let their imagination become your limit. Keep going. Your life is bigger than their opinion." Daniel closed the notebook. He placed it beside his father's toolbox. Then he turned off the office light. Outside, the city was beginning to glow. He walked toward his car. For years, he had dreamed about the moment when everyone would finally admit they had been wrong. But when that moment finally arrived, he discovered something surprising. It didn't feel as satisfying as he had imagined, because by then he no longer needed their approval. The greatest victory wasn't hearing people say, "We were wrong about you." The greatest victory was being able to say, "I didn't give up on myself." And that was the lesson Daniel wanted every person to remember. You may be underestimated. You may be rejected. You may have failed before. You may have people around you who don't understand your dream. But none of those things determine where your story ends. Sometimes the person everyone calls a failure is simply a person whose success hasn't happened yet. Sometimes the door that closes is forcing you to build your own. And sometimes the person who believes in you has to be you. Daniel didn't prove everyone wrong overnight. He proved himself right one small decision at a time. One failure, one lesson, one customer, one employee, one risk, one morning, one more attempt. Until one day, the boy everyone had underestimated became the man nobody could ignore. Not because he was the smartest, not because he was the luckiest, but because he refused to let other people's doubts become the ending of his story. And that was his greatest success. Final message. If you're watching this while struggling, failing, or wondering whether you're good enough, remember Daniel's journey. You don't have to prove your worth to everyone. You don't have to become successful overnight. You don't need a perfect beginning. You only need the courage to take the next step. Start where you are. Use what you have. Learn what you don't know. And keep going. Because one day, the people who told you that you couldn't may look at what you've built. But by then, their opinion won't matter anymore. Because you'll already know the truth. You were capable all along. If this story inspired you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their circumstances do not define their future.